That was introducing, for anyone that didn't know, Captain James McCormick, a 3-time Purple Heart winner, Silver Star, multi-bronze stars. I guarantee you, soon to be the Medal of Honor, guarantee you that President Trump will be placing the Medal of Honor on him. He was the guy. He did two separate wars, spent over 2 years in theater war, and lived to tell his stories. This right there, freeze on that, okay, Val? Can you freeze on that?
Truck? Yep.
You know, by the way, you know what that photo is? That photo is James taking 2 prisoners, and they're 2 Iraqi prisoners. This was during the first Gulf War. We'll have him talk about it when he comes back on. But taking 2 prisoners after they surrendered to a UFO. Fact check us on this one. We've got boots on the ground. This is the story I wanted Captain James to tell today. Iraqi soldiers surrender to a UFO. This story is the most astonishing thing I ever heard a couple of years ago. I have it presented, this full story, in the past from Cap McCormick. One version told was 8 minutes. The other version was 13 minutes. But I specifically wanted him on today to tell this story because when you see the review, the debriefing of this story, you'll find that it really is an Easter story after all. Is he back in the studio yet, Val?
Yes, he is. I'm gonna bring him in here.
Bring him on. Here we go.
All right, Captain James is back, hour 2, and Captain James, I'm gonna hand the mic right over to you whenever you're ready.
All right. So I didn't get a catch.
Prelim? Did you hear that prelim? Iraqi soldiers surrender to a UFO. Go.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that's a great story, and the fact that it is coming out now. A lot of things are coming out. I think that, you know, a lot of people that believe in UFOs, I think these are people that, and you know, I'm not saying that things like that don't exist. I know that they do. You know, I am a believer in the spiritual world, absolutely. But I also know that God is mighty powerful. You know, because when people truly change who they are, it's that spiritual intervention that, you know, but you have to welcome them into your heart. So anybody that goes through that change, at some point, they doubted the path that they were on, so much so that they opened up the door of opportunity for God to enter their heart. You see how I explain that, right? It's like you could be a devout Muslim, and there are plenty of Muslims in the past that have left their Muslim faith and embraced Christianity. The people that live in these primarily Islamic countries who practice their faith in the dark corners of basements and houses and stuff all over Iraq, Saudi Arabia, you know, Iran, in fear of death. Okay, because it's not that, you know, when we talked about it earlier today about being in America, you know, there's a fear of death. So when I tell this story about, I've never told it on Easter Sunday, but you know, this occurred after the Easter uprising. This occurred, you know, days after, as a matter of fact, when we were heading back into Camp Navistar. And you can see, you know, there's a picture of me in the back of a truck, you know, with these 2 guys that, you know, were part of those that you captured, that were just something was wrong with them. You could tell. But Ironically, what you don't realize is in that picture, underneath our feet is a bunch of fish. Okay? I mean, stinky fish with a tarpaulin over it. And so as I'm standing there, up there in the back, I'm standing on the bodies of a bunch of these fish. I don't know. They caught them earlier that day, but under there was weapons as well. So, you got to put all that into context as well. A great place to hide weapons, I guess, is if you put them in the bottom of a truckload of fish. So, and in that picture you see is me telling the guys to look back at the camera. So standing up there, look at that. You're standing up there. It wasn't that there was no fear, but I believe that at that point, look, if it's your time, it's your time. You don't take chances and do silly things that can end your life, but you can't walk through life and be afraid. You cannot walk through a battlefield and navigate through a battlefield constantly in fear. That'll get you killed quicker than anything else. So I just I'm putting this in context here because you want me to go into the UFO story. And as we're coming back down this road, we encounter these men that are frantically waving their hands, as if to surrender. I mean, and I had seen this during the first Gulf War and had seen it none in this time period, because most of the people that were out there fighting you, they were not going to surrender. Understand, surrender did not exist to them. They were willing to die. That's why that you would hear them say, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. You hear that. But a blood-curdling yell. I guess I would equate it to the rebel yell that the Yankee soldiers used to talk about from the Civil War, or the banzai charges by the Japanese. Same theory. But this is rooted in their radical belief, in their radical belief system, which, ironically, if you read a little bit about their faith, there's some similarities. Like, people say, well, they don't believe in Jesus. No, they do believe in Jesus. You see, this is how they convert Christians to Islam, is they believe in Jesus. So, yes, we believe in Jesus. He was a great prophet. But they don't believe that he's the Son of God. And they don't believe in this day being a holy day. They believe that he was martyred. That's it. You see, the death without the resurrection, you don't have that faith, see. So it's the resurrection that is the difference. And these men were radically entrenched as Al-Qaeda trained butchers and killers. And the fact that they changed, and they're surrendering and they're saying, please, please, mister, please, please. And the interpreter that was with us, we asked him, he said, well, of course you secure him, you do all that. I don't want to get into all of the details. I want to just get to the meat of this thing. But after going through the ambush, after going through the Easter Sunday, after, navigating all around that area, where here we are, we went from April the 5th to April the 7th to April 11th to now you're at the April 15th. So you go from the 5th to the 7th to the 11th to the 15th, these days. And on the 15th, these guys surrender. And they say, all of these things, and our interpreter's like, I'm like, what are they saying? Are they warning us? He says they're just not making any sense. They're saying that they were chased by a an alien, and I can't remember the word alien, Fedlock or something like that. But anyways, I could I'll look it up. I have a short story that's written about it, and I do an actual presentation on it. And it was in and around a place called the Ziggurat. And the Ziggurat is this huge temple that was built in the town of Iraq. Do your study on You got Babylon's just up the road. You know about the Tower of Babel, okay? So we passed that between Babylon and close to is where this occurs. Very biblical area. And in listening to these people blurt out that they were chased by aliens, they were spirits and ghosts, and so we got them secured, and this went on, this elevated to high levels. You know what I mean? It's like, but they told us that they had set up an ambush, and the ambush was intended to destroy our convoy as we're heading back. So as you head back, you always pick up what they call a backhaul. So the trucks had picked up several pieces of equipment for the first armored division that was leaving Iraq. So getting their equipment out during this time, they were delayed by several weeks to get out. So they were very happy that a truck company, 54 or 56 trucks at that point, were able to load up equipment so that they can start going home. And in that process, you're also starting to smell the barn, because you're pretty close to the border of Iraq and Kuwait. Just across the border is a little camp called Navistar. Navistar is where we dropped them off at, right there on the border. And then at that point, they're pretty much in a fairly safe zone in Kuwait. So all of that is in your mind as well. And then all of a sudden, you have these crazy guys that are surrendering to you. And simultaneously, you catch this truck with these guys, you know what I mean, who are going to shoot at one of our truck drivers. So this was the setup. The truck was the setup to drive, shoot, get one truck to stop towards the front, because we would allow them to pass, you know what I mean, civilians to pass. But then if you shot that truck, then you could stop the convoy, right? And you stop it at the right location so that all of these 30 well-armed, violent terrorists, there's no other way to put it, could attack your convoy. There's roadside bombs. There's a daisy chain of 155 howitzer rounds that are interlinked. So if you blow one, you blow them all. It would have been just a massive, And they're on the right side of the road. So they're right close. And all of this happens, and then these guys come running out, And they said that in the interrogation that they were approached by these two orbs. It's the only way I can explain it. A greenish light, like something that would change shapes. And they said that this thing whipped up a storm, a massive sandstorm. Well, we could see the massive, dust clouds in the distance. You could see that. I mean, that was normal. That happened a lot over there. Sandstorm. You pull your mask up, you put your goggles on, you just get ready for it. What we didn't know is that in that sandstorm, according to these people, that all but those two were sucked up into this sandstorm. And they're revealing this to the interpreter. We checked the area and we picked up several weapons that were scattered all across the ground. And we found the detonator that would have most certainly detonated, all of those howitzer rounds. Would have been devastating. That kind of an IED explosion would have blown half the road up. And most certainly would have killed several of those drivers. Not to mention, would have destroyed all that 1st Armored Division equipment and some of their guys who were riding in that equipment, in those trucks and armor personnel carriers on the back. So imagine, if you will, getting killed on your way home. And it happened, but it didn't happen that day. So all of this transpired, and I've told this story, because in the first Gulf War, I was a 15-6 investigator for a UFO sighting in the same area. So I was a sergeant then. When I come back and I revealed this to our battalion commander and said, this is what they said, this is what they seen. So we're gonna see if we're gonna do a 15-6 investigation, which essentially is the commander it's a fact-finding mission. Now, normally they don't allow, the person that's involved in it to do it, but I was allowed to go gather information. And it was eerily similar to the stories that I heard from these two soldiers in the first Gulf War who said that they were approached by these two lights in and around the ziggurat, these greenish, shape-shifting orbs, and that it brought them a level of calm, but they were still afraid. I mean, imagine if you see something like this, moving around and you hear an eerie sound, but in the case of these two insurgents, that it spoke to them and told them to stop what they're doing, or you will not see paradise. It was a very, very poignant message to them. And so to them, death, they want to experience the physical death. That's why it was so hard to take them prisoner. Because they would put a hand grenade and they'd pull the pin and they'd blow themselves up, or, they just wouldn't stop fighting. You had to shoot them. And that's the kind of thing, when you see people come running out, you think automatically it's a trap, but it wasn't a trap. They were genuinely impacted, influenced by this. And so as this played out and we did the investigation, what we determined was that we could not confirm or deny. But what we could confirm is that there was a very well-placed ambush that was waiting on us. And two radical Al-Qaeda trained terrorists surrendered without firing a shot. That in itself, to what I think, was the icing on the cake after this entire mission, this mission that went, and it seemed like it never ended. You see what happened on Easter, and then you see what happens this day. And it was like it just constantly confirmed. So let me tell you this as well. The soldiers that were with me that day, Blue, Lawson, Noble, Richardson, we've had these experiences in our life and things that have happened for no explained reason. I felt this level of peace that has come over me and this level of protection unlike I'd never felt before. And again, it's not that you go out looking for, to test that. There is a Bible verse about don't tempt the Lord thy God when Jesus is making his walk in the wilderness and the devil tries to tempt him, by telling him to jump off of this mountain and the angels will save you. Yes, the angels will save you, but you should not tempt the Lord thy God. And again, this transition and to see this play out further solidifies that faith. And people will look at you when you tell the story. Now the UFO people, they're like, it was a UFO. It was well, I guess it was. It was an unidentified flying object. I've seen some of those because I couldn't explain what it was. I was in a pool one night and I was laying on my back just kind of floating, and my kids were in there. We got a pool in the backyard and we're looking up at the sky and we see something go across the sky. My daughter says, "What is that?" I said, I don't know. It could be a satellite. Could be a plane flying real high. I said, so it's an unidentified flying object, right? Or it could be an angel. Or it could be a demon. Whatever it is. It obviously had no intention of doing bad things. Whatever this was, whether it be of another world, of the spiritual realm of God, 30 people disappeared. Okay? Their equipment, there was clothing there was shoes there. There was stuff scattered all around. You could tell, and there was sand everywhere. So you tell me, did they all just blow away? Did they all just run away? I doubt that very seriously. At least not without blowing up their IED. They would have at least blew that up because I had experienced these people long enough to know. But that impacted those two men to the point that they abandoned that mission. They surrendered and they begged for forgiveness. And I would hope that they also made the transition to faith in Christ. They would have definitely had the opportunity. What a miracle story that is. But when you tell people that, they say, well, it was a UFO. And as I'm presenting this, and I've presented at UFO conferences, okay? And hundreds of people. They said, well, what do you think? What happened to those people? I said, I don't know. At that time, I was a lieutenant. I didn't get to call the shots, where they went, what happened to them. But I do know what I saw in their face and what I saw on the ground and what my men saw and what we've experienced since that whole time period in the way God has impacted all of our lives. Again, it hasn't been that we haven't met challenges, but it has been that we have been able to meet those challenges and survive things that just, you feel this protective barrier around you. So I tell people, I say, look, for me, whatever y'all call it, they were guardian angels for me. And I believe they were sent by God. And of course, the steam just comes out of them. It's like, I said, but if you can explain it better, and then they'll go in and some of them will say, well, it might have been because of the description. And they'll have all these different descriptions for aliens and alien forms of life and things like that. But ultimately, we were saved for a greater purpose, I believe. And that whole experience, coupled with the Easter Sunday experience, as I said that night, after all this is over, underneath the cross sabers of Baghdad. You know, Greg and Val, I'll tell you, there's so many things that occurred, but that day, and then following up with the days after, you know, rockets ripping across the sky, you know, exploding, you know, a couple hundred yards away, you know, bullets whizzing past your head, Al Qaeda insurgents, you know, terrorists, known criminals and thugs surrendering, whirls of sandstorms and sucking up 30 people. You know, if that doesn't
Captain,
restore your faith, then I don't know what will.
Captain,
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Let me get this straight. You faced 32 people,
Mhm.
2 of which surrendered, 30 which disappeared. I just want to get this straight. I want to give you my theory and then the mic back to you. My theory is that clearly the quote UFO, whatever, was the hand of God.
Yeah.
And now my theory in listening to your just stunning monologue here is that there were 32 opportunities to repent and only 2 did.
That's correct.
Do you believe that? Can you confirm that? Just go ahead with there. One of the honestly, seriously, one of these days we got to do a military war story only show, just to try to get them off your bucket list, because you have hundreds of them, Captain McCormick, hundreds of them. This to me
Well,
was
I
the most
mean,
moving. This was the most moving because I said the first time around. This was a
yeah.
couple of years ago, and it's still on Twitter Spaces on my YouTube.
Mhm.
First time around, I said, "Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
The biggest mystery to me, and I know other people out there, has been this wicked jihadist thing.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? We won't even go there. I've never
Yeah.
seen anything as wicked and as you described so beautifully. Because your boots
Yeah.
on the ground, dude. You looked at these guys. You beat the crap out of Iraqi soldiers without killing
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So my question to you is: were there 32 opportunities to repent, and 2 people actually crossed over out of that evil world? Back to you, Captain.
Well, and they've disappeared too. I mean, that is, you know, I fully suspect that at some point in my life, later in life, maybe the next 10, 15 years, I'll run into them again. Or somebody will hear this story and they'll say, that was me. You know what I mean? And my hope is that they're spreading the message of Jesus Christ and the miracle of that day in places that don't normally get it. Um, you know, if you look at the story of Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul the apostle, that's a great story because, you know, he persecuted the Christians. He held the cloaks while they stoned Stephen to death, but he made that transition. So, I mean, there is a level of hope. If those guys who grew up their whole life, they were born into this, okay? So, in some of that, you know, I think I remember that, you know, well, they were born into this. You know, I was born into Christianity. So I believe in Christianity, but I believe not because I've just been told. Maybe when I was younger, yes. But it was really after I experienced the mighty hand of God and how he moves and how he maneuvered in our lives. You can't take that away. You know, the military can do whatever they want to do. People can argue against, you know, the validity or of the war or what should we have been there. That was not my question. I was there because I was told to be there, and I felt obligated to be there because we experienced 9/11. And because of that experience, and I lost friends, good friends, Seth DeForn, killed February of 2004. In Iskandariya, Iraq. All of these things occurred. So death was there every day. Death was a constant companion every day. And you're in a land where, I mean, these are people that were, but these kind of guys are the kind of guys that put Daniel Pearl on his knees and cut his head off on a video. Okay? That's the kind of people we're talking about. So people can say and believe what they want. Time has got between the actions and now. And there's a lot of armchair quarterbacks out there that would hear that and say, this is my assessment. Well, I don't give you an assessment. I give you what I saw and what I know to be true. And that whole experience, because it solidified my faith. And if you watch the walks in life that occurred after that, believe me, I had some struggles. I dealt with a little bit of, I dealt with alcoholism after coming back. I dealt with a lot of things. But God's hand was always there, grabbing me, saying, go here. And because I had surrendered, like these guys did, to his will, he always put me where I needed to be. And then he challenged you. Over the last few years, he's challenged me with some of the most, bitter, resentful people I've ever met in my life. I've watched it through, a couple of ministrations here. I never thought that I would see people like that, but they're there and they hate you because you have faith. And again, they kill you, they disparage you, then they kill the message that God, I believe, wants me to deliver from those days, from the defense of Baghdad International Airport on Easter Sunday, to the convoys, to the incident that occurred with these two Al-Qaeda operatives that surrendered because they claimed that they were approached. I believe they were approached. And I had two trash bags, big black trash bags, I'll never forget it, filled with weapons and ammunition. If you don't believe me, go ask Captain Pat Hinton, who was our commander. Is like, what are you going to do with all those weapons? Well, I'm going to turn them in. I'm going to use some of them. I'm going to turn them in. We're going to, all of these things that you were supposed to do. But when you lay all that out and you say, tell me how it is that what these two guys said happened didn't actually happen. I believe that it happened.
Captain, take a quick minute here. Walk me through, because we've been on the phone and live talking about this, bringing you back just a little bit to memory lane. Walk me through when you walked into that scene of all these guys who disappeared. You told that at length, but take a minute or two as you're walking in, because I'm saying, no, you were the real deal. You were there. Tell me about that.
Yeah.
In bank, because you're talking about jihadists that they wouldn't surrender for anything. Go ahead.
I fully expected to see dead bodies. What I didn't expect to see was clothing, shoes, weapons, as if people were ripped out of their very clothes and shoes, strewn all over the ground. The detonator. All of this stuff was there. I want to tell you, it was almost like walking into, it was like a ghost town. I don't know any other way to say it. And these guys were crying. They were speaking nonstop. Our interpreter was trying to, to keep up with them. But it was a very crazy situation. So my thoughts and my beliefs on that, seeing that, goes back to that prayer that I had underneath the sabers. And I got to tell you that my driver, Brian Noble, and I've said this before, is one of the bravest soldiers I've ever had the honor of working with in my life. I can know of 3 times that I can count on my hand that that man has saved my life. I know. I was there. But he told me, he says, under the sabers, as we've talked about this, he said, I prayed too. Now, this was a guy that didn't pray much. He struggled with faith and believing and not believing. Totally transitioned that man. So it didn't just affect me. It affected a lot of people. And there are people right now in Ohio and West Virginia and Tennessee or, in different places that are thinking about this day in a different way, because they're looking at Easter and they're thinking about it. And those that saw all these things that happened, but more importantly, that crew of mine that went through every single bit of that, I believe that souls were saved for Jesus Christ because of all of that. And if me experiencing that chaos, if me experiencing everything that brought you to that point, because if ever there was a sinner in the world, it was me, buddy. I've done a lot of bad things in my life that I've spoke about, haven't spoke about, killed, not murdered, but killed human beings and talked about it very matter of factly. And people think, well, must not bother you. Must be a monster. And I've been called those things, a monster. And to tell this story, you hear people, they'll say, well, you're a liar. Okay, you don't have to believe me. But I'm here. And there are reasons why I put things in museums. It's just like when Dwight Eisenhower wanted all the Germans and all the people to go through the concentration camps, because he knew that somewhere in the future that someone would come up and say, well, this didn't happen. There was no Holocaust. And sure enough, he was right. But for many years, those that lived and actually physically seen it and shared that information and videotaped it and filmed it and took pictures of it, yeah, it really happened. And there are things that happen that I believe are designed to happen for the purpose of showing the power and the greatness of God. So do I think it was aliens from outer space? No, I think it was the hand of God, just like you said, Greg. I think it was the same thing that stopped bullets that were whizzing past my face. Literally, one ricocheted, off of the side of your helmet. And I have seen guys that had bullets that went through their rifle, bullets that went through, the strap that hung off their rifle. Had one guy that had a first aid kit, combat lifesaver first aid kit strung around his side, and we were looking at it later, and a bullet had went through the strap and never touched him. Now, how does that happen? Well, in so many instances, how does that happen? It's because God was there with us and because he protected us. That's my message to people. And because we followed, we obeyed. It's just like David, when he went down to face Goliath, he went down listening and following what God said. But he still had to be good with that slingshot. He still had to be good with his aim. So you still have to be proficient in your duties, in your things that you need to do, whatever your job is. But you have to take the time to share these messages of hope and faith and things that occurred in your life that you just can't explain. You know, a non-believer can't explain it, but a believer can explain it very easily. And that's what I think occurred that day. And more so than anything, the explanation of the lights and the orbs. I believe that's true. They saw every bit of that. And I believe, and I know that's something, you know, tell me what purpose that terrorist would have with laying out weapons and strewing them out in a line, going through all the work of digging in multiple artillery shells, wiring them up, hiding it, you know, through and under, you know, the wire went from the other side of the road into an underpass, you know, underneath the road, only to surrender to a group of people that are coming back from a mission. I've got 2 gun trucks at that point, our truck and another. Tell me what the purpose would be in just surrendering like that. Unless you were truly telling what had happened to you. There would be no purpose in it. They could have surrendered. They could have came, if they were looking for food, a way to escape Iraq, they could have done that very easily. They could have worked with the U.S. forces, and that would have been made possible. But they would have never went through all of that trouble to make that story up if it had not been for something greater than what we can explain. And look, sometimes we just accept it as that's, you know, it's God's will. God willed us to survive. We survived. But now God didn't just will us and keep us alive to just sit on this story or to allow people to kill that story by not elevating it to the levels it needs to be. This is a small part. The big part is yet to come when you get that platform to be able to tell it to the world. This is what happened. And I think that in a lot of ways that there are people that hear this and they say, you know, it's hard to explain, but there's videos that show it. Most, except for this. I wish there was a video that existed about the orbs, but there's definitely videos of what happened at the Battle of Biop. There's definitely videos and pictures from those ambushes. And there's definitely maps and diagrams and literally hundreds of stories that are out there. There's 2 documentaries that were made by the Army. You know, one is this one right here. It's called The Road War. Go look it up. It's on YouTube. Operation Iraqi Freedom, The Road War. It goes into a lot of things about that weekend. But it doesn't really focus on the fact that that was also Easter Sunday. And I think that that's the purpose that God has with reviving this story and probably bringing you both into my life is because here's an opportunity to focus on what really mattered about that. The people that found salvation and how many people could potentially go to Christ by hearing and seeing and elevating that story. It could be thousands, it could be hundreds, it could be millions. But if just one escapes or 2, like these 2 guys, then what a great thing that is. Glory be to God. To him goes the glory.